he wanted to build a car, as he said, to kick their ass on the street, too. So this is Carroll Shelby's answer to Ferrari. There were rumors it was painted Ferrari red, that was his sort of to Ferrari.
For more than 50 years, one car sat outside every record book, every registry, and every conversation about Carroll Shelby's legacy. Collectors assumed it had been cut apart and melted down decades ago. The same fate that swallowed dozens of other test cars from the golden age of American muscle. But somewhere along the way, a rumor refused to die. A handful of stubborn researchers refused to accept the official story, and a car that history had already buried turned out to still be breathing. What they eventually pulled out from behind decades of dust and misinformation was not just a forgotten Mustang. It was a direct line into the private workshop where Carroll Shelby experimented with ideas Ford was never supposed to see finished. To understand why this discovery mattered so much, you have to understand the man behind it. Carroll Shelby did not build his reputation sitting behind a desk. He built it on the track, driving cars most engineers considered too dangerous to trust. And he built it later in a workshop where rules bent whenever they got in the way of speed. Shelby came up through Texas racing circuits with a reputation for fearlessness that bordered on recklessness. And by the time the world caught up to him, he had already won at Le Mans, already proven himself against the best European teams, and already started asking the one question that would define the rest of his career. What happens if you strip a car down to nothing and rebuild it around raw power instead of polish? A failing heart eventually forced him out of the driver's seat, but it did not slow him down. If anything, it redirected his obsession. Unable to race himself, Shelby turned his attention to building machines that could win without him behind the wheel. He took the lightweight British AC chassis, dropped in a brutal American V8, and created the Cobra, a car that terrified as much as it impressed. That single decision changed the direction of his life, and it eventually put him in the same room as Ford executives who needed exactly what he had: the instinct to turn a decent car into a dangerous one. Ford's problem in the mid-1960s was simple to describe and agonizing to solve. Ferrari dominated endurance racing, and Henry Ford II wanted revenge badly enough to throw enormous resources at it. Shelby became the man who could actually deliver that revenge, taking over the GT40 program and turning an expensive experiment into a genuine weapon. When Ford finally beat Ferrari at Le Mans, first in 1966, and then for 3 more years running, Shelby's name became permanently welded to Ford's most important victories. But racing glory was only part of what Ford wanted from him. They also needed someone who could take their new pony car, the Mustang, and give it teeth. That is where the Shelby Mustang story usually begins for most people. The GT350 arrived first, followed by the GT500, and both became instant legends. But the finished production cars people remember were never the whole picture. Behind every Shelby model that reached a showroom floor sat a graveyard of prototypes, mules, and one-off experiments that never got the chance to be famous. These were the cars used to test engine combinations, suspension geometry, body panels, and styling ideas that either made it into production or quietly disappeared once their job was done. Nobody in the 1960s was thinking about future collectors. They were thinking about deadlines. When a prototype had served its purpose, it usually met the same fate: sold off quietly, stripped for parts, or crushed outright. That is exactly the story everyone believed about the car, eventually nicknamed Little Red. It was a 1967 Shelby GT500 development car, but unlike almost every Shelby Mustang people picture, it was not a fastback. It was a notchback coupe, an oddity within an already rare lineup. Along with a sister prototype known as the Green Hornet, Little Red stood apart from every catalog photo and every restoration guide because it simply did not match the shape people associated with Shelby's name. It had been built as a rolling test bed, a machine used to explore big block engine packages, supercharging setups, and styling cues that Ford and Shelby American were considering for future models. In many ways, it was less a car and more a physical question. How far could the Mustang be pushed before it stopped being a Mustang at all? For decades, the accepted answer to, "Where is Little Red now?" was simple and final. It had been destroyed. Most people had no reason to doubt that explanation, because it matched everything they knew about how prototype cars were treated at the time. There was no sentimentality attached to test vehicles once their experiments concluded. If Ford or Shelby American had decided to eliminate the car after finishing their research, nobody would have blinked. The story could have ended there, another intriguing footnote in Shelby's career, permanently unsolved. Instead, everything changed because of another car. The Green Hornet, Little Red's fraternal twin in the world of Shelby prototypes, resurfaced and eventually landed in the hands of a serious collector who began digging into its history. That car alone was remarkable, packed with forward-thinking engineering like early fuel injection and independent rear suspension, features that felt decades ahead of a late 1960s Mustang. As restoration specialists pored over the Green Hornet's documentation, a nagging question kept surfacing. If one of these strange experimental notchbacks had survived against every expectation, was it really impossible that the other one had too? Most experts assumed the search was hopeless. Little Red had been gone for so long, and so many attempts to trace it had failed, that continuing to look felt like chasing a ghost. But a small team of researchers decided the previous searches had been making the same mistake over and over again. They had all been hunting for the car using its Shelby-assigned identification, the serial number tied to its identity as a modified performance car. That approach kept leading to dead ends. Eventually, someone realized the smarter path was to abandon that number entirely and chase the car's original Ford identification instead, the VIN assigned before Shelby American ever touched it. That shift in strategy turned out to be the key that unlocked everything. Following the original factory VIN opened a paper trail that the Shelby serial number could never have revealed, winding through old title records, forgotten registrations, and a scattered ownership history that eventually pointed toward rural Texas. It is a strange twist worth sitting with. The car had not been hiding because no one bothered to look. It had been hiding because everyone was looking for the wrong name. In a world where a badge can turn an ordinary car into a legend, that same badge had accidentally erased the trail leading back to the truth. In early 2018, that trail finally led to a discovery nobody could have staged for drama even if they had tried. The car sat in North Texas, not gleaming under a preservation cover, but rough, incomplete, and easy to walk past without a second glance. Its engine and transmission were missing. Body panels were gone. It had spent years surrounded by other neglected vehicles, indistinguishable at a glance from any other tired old Mustang shell rusting away on a backlot. To someone unfamiliar with its history, it would have looked like scrap. To the people who understood exactly what VIN they were looking at, it was something closer to a miracle. The location itself says almost everything about how this car actually survived. It was not protected by a climate-controlled garage or a careful collector who understood its significance. It survived through neglect, confusion, and sheer accident, passing through a string of owners who likely had no real understanding of what they had. That is often how the rarest prototypes make it through the decades. Production cars get protected because people recognize their value immediately. Experimental cars slip through the cracks precisely because their importance is not obvious on the surface. If nobody realizes what a car actually is, there is no reason to save it, and equally, sometimes there is no reason to bother destroying it either. It simply gets forgotten, shuffled from lot to lot, until someone finally asks the right question. Once experts examined the wreckage sitting in that Texas field, verification became the next challenge. Authentication for a car like this cannot rest on appearance alone, especially when the body has been stripped and altered over the years. Researchers cross-referenced the recovered VIN against original factory and Shelby American documentation, working alongside recognized Mustang historians to confirm what the paperwork suggested. When that confirmation finally came through, the announcement rippled across the collector community almost instantly. This was not simply a rare Mustang. It was a long-lost GT500 EXP prototype, the very car most experts had confidently declared destroyed for half a century. Its significance goes far beyond rarity for rarity's sake. Little Red represented ideas Ford and Shelby were testing years before the market was ready for them, technology, and styling concepts explored in private long before any customer ever saw them on a showroom floor. Its connection to big block performance experiments and supercharging tests placed it directly in the middle of Shelby's most ambitious engineering work. Even more interesting, elements of its styling are believed to have influenced the 1968 Mustang California Special, meaning that even while the original car sat lost and forgotten, echoes of its design had already reached the public through a completely different vehicle. People had unknowingly been looking at fragments of Little Red's legacy for years without knowing the source car itself was still out there somewhere. Once the discovery was confirmed, a new and far more complicated question emerged. What do you actually do with a car like this? Some purists argued it should be left exactly as it was found, preserved in its damaged, incomplete state as physical evidence of everything it had survived. Every missing panel and every scar told part of the story, and restoring the car too aggressively risked erasing the very history that made the discovery meaningful in the first place. Others took the opposite position, arguing that Shelby never built cars to sit motionless as museum relics. His entire career was built around motion, noise, and performance, and a car like Little Red deserved to run again, not simply exist as a static artifact behind velvet ropes. The team that ultimately took charge of the car chose the harder path of full restoration, but they approached it with careful documentation rather than guesswork. That distinction matters because restoring an experimental prototype is nothing like restoring a standard production model. There is no single factory specification to fall back on, no clean blueprint sitting in an archive waiting to be copied. A car built for ongoing testing changes constantly throughout its working life, meaning the restoration team essentially had to decide which version of the car's history they were trying to bring back to life. In January 2020, the finished result was unveiled publicly, and for the first time ever, Little Red stood alongside the Green Hornet in fully restored form. Two experimental Shelby notchbacks, both once presumed gone forever, sharing the same room after decades apart. It was a moment that did more than satisfy curiosity. It forced a correction in the historical record, proving that a car confidently declared destroyed by generations of experts could still be sitting out there, waiting for someone willing to question the accepted story. What makes this discovery worth remembering is not simply that a rare car turned up after decades of searching. Plenty of forgotten vehicles surface in barns and backlots every year. What sets this apart is how deliberately wrong the conventional wisdom had been, and how much patient, unglamorous research it took to correct it. There was no secret garage, no hidden vault, no dramatic reveal pulling a cover off a perfectly preserved machine. There was only paperwork, persistence, and a willingness to abandon the obvious search path once it stopped producing answers. Carroll Shelby's real secret was never a single locked-away masterpiece. It was the entire culture of experimentation he built around himself, a space where wild ideas got tested long before anyone worried about whether they were safe, marketable, or permanent. Little Red is proof that some of that experimentation survived, buried in plain sight, waiting for someone to finally ask the right question. Like, subscribe, and follow for more.